Hey, and welcome back to Rennch. On today's episode, we are actually welding the quarter panels on my 69 911S race car to street car Blasphemy build. Welcome. So today's the day that we've all been waiting for, which is the permanent affixation of those quarter panels onto that car. By the way, I'm sure I'm going to say flares at some point today, so I apologize ahead of time. This has been a bit of a terrifying day that I've been preparing for, because this is obviously the most outward-facing welding and preparation and bodywork I have to do on this car. So, I mean, even with the front fenders, I can finagle it, and with the front thing I've got to do, I can finagle it, but like, you see the quarter panels, you see the interface between the body and the quarter, and it's like, I don't know, I've got to just sort of figure it out. And part of the challenge is that if you look at quarter panels, I got two pieces of metal here, hopefully you guys can see this, they can move this way, 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 and every other variant in between. And because it's a Porsche, they are millimeter precise. So it's a little intimidating to figure out how to make sure the gaps are right on the doors, on the windows, on the deck lid. It's just super intimidating. So I've invited a bunch of people to get their eyeballs on this thing and give me whatever advice they have, but it looks like not a lot of people have done this, which is probably why you don't see a lot of YouTube content. So if you are doing this project right now, I'm going to do my best to explain to you kind of where my head is as we go along. However, the first thing I'm going to do is show you what I think is some kind of innovation. And it involves a jig. I'm really fortunate that I happen to have another 69 911 that I can measure certain points of. And what I decided to do is measure the car in three different spots. One is at the upper tip of the quarter panels, just right here where the light, let's see if you can see this, right here, this corner to this corner, which is the one I have on my sheet, and that's 866 millimeters plus one. And that one's right on the money. The other spot, which I don't have a measurement for, is down below here. I don't know if you can see this, but right here on this tip to that tip. And that one is measuring about 860. So I've got 866 on top, I've got 860 on the bottom. So there's a little bit of a curve in. And then finally, I'm gonna measure from here to here, which is gonna get my opening, and this one is about, I think it was 908. Yeah, this is about 908 from here to here. So what I'm going to do is I've picked up three metal rods, and I'm going to cut these to those exact lengths, 866, 860, and 908. Then I'm going to put them on the back of that car and just tack them in. I'm going to put a little weld in each corner, so I'm going to have the thing triangulated in three different spots. And what I'm hoping that's going to do is it's going to cure the back and forth and the, let's see, the rotation and this rotation. I think I can fix both of those using these sort of fixed jigs. Once I get those things tacked in, I'm then going to work on door panel gaps, I think on the top. Make sure that those are right, put a weld in there, then I'm going to work on the gap on the bottom. So once those things are good, I should be good to stitch the entire things together. So I've already prepared, I degreased, I polished these. So the next thing I have to do is measure them precisely and cut them to the right length. All right, I've got my first bar in place, and I'm going to just put a little tack here, move it over, and tack it on the other side. All right, 1 down, 3 to go. Oops, what's wrong? You put a little pressure right here.
That way?
Yeah, I just need this thing to be right there. Just a little bit, right? A little more. Yeah, right there. Close your eyes.
Okay, got him.
All right, so now we are post-jig, and I am very happy with how this rear is aligning. This side was sagging down that way quite a bit, and now it seems to be much better. And now it's looking really flat. So I think what I'm going to do is actually put the rear bumper back on so I can continue to keep things in order and precise. And let me give you a close-up of what I did here. Here's what I did. I've got these on here, and I've just got these. I got 3 of them. And they are basically just keeping the quarters oriented correctly so that this deck lid gap is spot on. So that is sorted. Yeah. Now I'm going to put the bumper back on and make sure that it's sort of loosely fit, and I know I have adjustability. And then I'm going to work on door gaps. So I think my order of how I want to do this is I'll release this. I'll try to get this gap as good as I can on the top, and then I'll just put a weld here. And then I'll start messing with the bottom here because I have a little bit of leeway back and forth once that thing is pinned in. And I'll see if I can get that gap right, and then put a couple here. Then once it's set, then I can just go around and continue to plug, and then obviously I've got to take the most time here on this seam to make sure that it's flush and correct. This is going to be the scariest part, I think, of all of this. Now, obviously, the idea is to take your time as much as you can. And when you get in here really tight, you realize there's just a little bit of wiggle room. There's a millimeter, a half a millimeter that you can move stuff around. So, again, my goal is if I can target the easy stuff first, which is if I can get this gap, this first top half, to be 3 millimeters and look good, I can fairly easily drop a little bit of weld here and then here and make this work. And then I've got, of course, plenty of room to move the bottom within here, and even within I can move it a little bit. So yeah, I'm going to clamp the thing down and just get cracking on it. All right, so I don't know if you guys can see this very close, but I have like a perfect gap right here. This is an absolutely perfect gap. So I don't think there's anything I can do now other than to really clamp this thing down, and then I'm going to just put a little bit of, I'm going to put a couple of welds here and here, and then focus on the rest. But actually, the rest of this gap also looks really good. I just have to push it in a little bit, but if I can just get one in, then I've got this thing kind of set, and it won't go back and forth from the top. Against the quarter panel, as much as I can. And I'm talking like an expert, but this is also the first time I've done this. I just know that if we can eliminate as much of the gap as possible. Now I have this thing pretty flushed up here for a spot weld. And I'm going to do the same thing here. And I'm going to keep checking the gap before I do anything. Still 3 mil, spot on. Okay, dudes, this is it. I got 3 spots I can weld, so let's weld it. Now I want to give you guys a close-up of the prep. So everything has been shaved down, everything has got holes, so I can do these spot welds all the way up. This is what I've just done. I just plugged a couple of the holes. So now in theory, this 3 millimeter gap is still perfectly 3 millimeters. And that is where this thing's going to live up top. And actually, I'm getting very lucky because it would appear as if this gap is going all the way down and it looks perfect. So I think all I really have to do here is push this in just a little bit so that these two sides are flush. And then I think I can just weld right here to keep this thing in place. Then I'm going to move on to another part of the car and work on the gaps on the other side. For the bottom part of this door, which, I mean, it's honestly perfect, but I think all I'm going to do here is I'm going to put one of my favorite little tech screws in the door, and that's going to secure this piece. See how this one looks. That looks better to me, but we'll see. It's a little tight here now. This one's better, but now it's too tight. It's too tight here. Getting there though. I actually loosened it up a little bit. Let me see if that worked. Yeah, that worked actually really well. I just loosened the screw a teeny bit and it worked. That's a little tight though, isn't it? It's just a little tight right here. So I'm going to make a mark here knowing that this part's a little bit tight the way it is. So I'm just going to hit it with a Sharpie and that'll give me some reference to move it just a couple of millimeters that way. So if I could get this thing to sit right here, it would be ideal, but there's no way. There's no way. But let's see here. Yeah, right here I think is going to be perfect. I wonder if I could just put a clamp on here and wing it. The deal is though, is this stuff is so tight and it's so precise. You know, Porsche nerds are going to get like, hey, is that a 3 millimeter gap? And it's like, it better be. Wrong clamp. What do I have for a clamp? To actually make it work. So right now I'm feeling like I'm about a 1/2 millimeter out. It's so close that I feel like I can at least drop a weld here and here and just secure it to the spot, and then I think I can finagle everything else I need to. Yeah, dude. Here's a straight shot of that gap, which is 3 millimeters. It's hard to see it, but you get the idea. It's really good. There you go. But it's pretty straight all the way down. So one down. I mean, obviously, now I've got it fixed here and here, and this thing's getting lined up. So we're getting there. We're getting there. All right, moment of truth on the passenger side. Dun, dun, dun. Booyah. Look at that pretty 3 millimeters. So what I'm going to do here on the bottom, it opens up just a little bit. You can see, even here it does on the factory rocker. It gets a little bit, and then it kind of opens up a little wider here. But here's what I'm going to do. This whole section is leaded from the factory. So you use lead filler, and then it smooths this whole area out. I'm going to do the same on both, and then I'll just put a little extra lead filler here to make that gap perfect when the time comes. But super pleased with it. I think it came out great. So I think the next section I'm going to do is going to be this section. And on this side, it's really close. I just have to push this down a little bit. And I think I can just put a couple of welds right here, and that will hold it in place. I just did a preliminary test of the deck lid, and it sits in here really well. This one's a little more challenging because it's just a little bit high, and it needs to come in this direction a little bit, which I think I can do if I pull this bumper off. So I'm going to do this side first, then pull the bumper off and see if I can weld it in the same spot, which is down here. Before I do any of that, I'm actually going to take my grinder and take a few millimeters off of each side and just give myself a little bit of room, because there's a flange under there. If you remember, there's a flange under here, and I have plenty of wiggle room to weld, but right now, because everything else has been really tightened up, I ran out of space. So I'm going to kind of put a screwdriver in here and just run my sander up along this edge. Probably take it down to where these holes are, to be honest, and give myself like 1/8 of an inch to weld. And I'll do the same on the other side. Okay, so what I've done here is I've shaved this down. I've pulled the quarter panel down a little bit, and then I just ran my sander here to make sure that I had a really nice transition between the two pieces, and I do. So now I think I'm just going to put a couple of welds here and tie it together in the front so that this section is pretty settled, and maybe I'll do one in here as well. As soon as I do one in here, I'll tap this with a hammer and make sure that it's kind of all flush in here, and then I will get in there with some welding. I just need to push this lip down a little bit, but I'm not going to touch it until I weld this part together here and make sure that this section is staying where I want it to. At that point, I'll be able to focus on here and move this down so I can get that line dialed. Then I think we're going to be good to go. So let's get in there. All right, so I've got this kind of roughed in right now. My plan is to dress these as I go. So I'm going to put, another weld like here, and then I'll smooth it over. Put another one here and smooth it over so that I have a pretty flat section to play with. That's the plan anyway. This one, I went a little aggressive. I'm going to go with a nicer pad, smoother one for the rest of this. I would love for this whole seam to be just invisible and all metal, but I'm not that good yet. For some reason, I still get all these little gaps here, but I'm going to keep working on it. And I went a little aggressive on this corner here. I kind of dug into the corner a little bit, so I'm going to have to play with that. But again, it's just metal, so I can always put some weld in there and then tweak it so it's perfect. But I'm really, really happy with the fact that this thing aligned and I've got a nice curve in here now. You can see I got a little bit of weld right there, but I'll be able to shave that down. I got this pretty much all sealed up, and I will grind this all off. But for now, I'm going to put another one here, and then I'm going to orient this part and kind of close it. I'm sort of going along this line here. This line has to go straight up. So I think what I'll do is I'll close this gap up and I'll just weld this little spot in between the two. And that should be pretty good. We should be pretty close at that point. Well, I have a lot more welding and stitching and grinding to do, but this is pretty flat. It's a little warped. I feel just a little bit of a dip right here. But same drill. I'm going to be using lead filler. There's a bit of a trough here now. And yeah, it's okay. I got to fix a hole I burnt through right here. But in the grand scheme of things, it is Now one with the car. Let's see if I can get a better angle. And yeah, so there we go. That's a pretty good angle of it. Again, I feel a little bit of a trough. It's hard to see it from here. You can kind of see it, but it's on there. And before I do the final part and on the end here, I'm going to hit the other side. So like the other side, the important part for me when I'm welding this is to make sure that this transition is right. So I'm right on the money. There's a little gap right here. And I'm going to do the same thing on the other side, which is I'm just going to weld this area and make sure this is set. And then I'll get in here and get this all welded in and then work my way back like I did on the other side. But so far, so good. So you're seeing a slightly different technique on this side. I stole this from Trev's blog. Thank you, Trev. And what I've been trying to do is just keep the heat out of this panel. And so far, it's actually working really well. There's no real waves in it. I'm not sure if it's easy for you guys to see or not, but in the back here, let me turn this down a little. In the back here, this line is meant to move right along with this line. And I'm basically within a millimeter with my little jig here, but there's a gap here. There's like an 1/8 of an inch gap between the body and where this panel naturally wants to go. So what I did on the, So what I did on the other side was I just took a lever and I pulled the body itself, the lip of the, whatever the thing is, the flange, and I pulled it closer to the flare here because I want to preserve this natural curve of the flare. But I'm really happy with how this looks so far. Like, it looks better than the other side. You'll see that I've just been cooling it down, which makes the welds turn black. And then I just hit it with a brush and everything really cleaned up. And I was finding that even though it's weld through primer, that the primer doesn't weld very well. So I'm going to try to eliminate this gap here, finish the rest of this thing, and then I'll actually grind the whole thing down. So this is fully stitched now. I did a pretty good job keeping it cool. Only a little bit of warpage can I feel now. So I'll take it easy when I'm grinding. Really love how this thing came out. It was really flat and I'll be able to make a nice curve out of this. And of course I have to clean all of this up before I try to weld it. I actually have to make a piece that goes right here. And a lot of this will be leaded as well. So I've got to do that. Grind this side down. Next project is to, well, finish seam welding this, but also get this part down. And I just put the deck lid on. It's just a teeny smidge off up here. So I think that by the time I push this down and I can get some weld in right there, that it should be fine. The other thing I'm challenged by here in the corner is that there's so much lead here from assembly that it's hard to weld on a little bit. So I'm hoping that this section right here is actually metal and not lead, because that'd be a bummer. Okay, so we are mostly done. It is completely secure here, underneath, and I mean pretty much everywhere. What I have to do now is I have 99 plug welds, I counted them, I have to do. And these are the things that I pre-drilled ahead of time. This is a pretty simple process. If I can clamp it, I clamp it and then weld it. If I can't clamp it, I think pretty much I can clamp everything here. I'm always in between clamps using the body hammer to make sure it's as set as it's going to be. Once these are all welded, they all have to be ground down, dressed as we like to call them. And there's a few other surfaces, like these surfaces right here on the window are a little uneven. By the way, here's a little trick. If you have a hard time getting your ground to work, I don't know why I haven't been doing this the whole time, but you can clamp a clamp on and then put your ground onto the clamp, and that works as well. Anyway, so I'll show you guys one, and I'll show you kind of what it looks like before and after, but again, I have 99 of these to do, so I'm going to actually spare you all of that. And what you're going to see is, I'm going to show you this one, and how I mean basically I'm just going to weld it. I'm going to clamp it and weld it. You've seen that already today, but I'll do it one more time for you. And then offline, I will do the rest of this, get the entire thing welded and then ground down. It may take me, I expect hours of welding and grinding. So this may continue into tomorrow, but let me just do one real quick so you see it. What I've done here is I've moved the clamp as close to the hole or the plug as I can. Let me turn the camera on. So I've got the hole right there. So I set the welder in the middle as far as voltage goes, because I really want some good penetration on these. And I clamp as close as I can, or however I want the panel to be. I clamp it and then throw a little weld on there, and that's it. I'm going to do that 98 more times, and I'm going to grind everything down. I'm going to listen to a new audiobook, and then I'll see you guys after and kind of show you around a little bit and show you where we are. It's the next day, and I've just put the final outer weld bead on my quarter panels. There's a couple things I just wanted to go over while they're still fresh in my head that I think would be helpful. I'm going to show you what the welds look like before I grind them, because I wanted you to see, you know, YouTube is full of welding porn and people that lay these dimes down and are amazing, but the weld's got to penetrate. That's the main thing, is it has to go through the sheets of metal that you're trying to bond together. And if you can do that where it's not blowing a hole and you're at the highest setting you can without warping the metal or blowing a hole in the metal, then that's what you want. You want like really high penetration. Southwest is still flying. Anyway, really high penetration. There was nothing particularly tricky on this. So I'm going to walk through a couple of sections on the car if you are doing this right now in the future and you need some help with it. All in all, though, the main thing about this entire install is what I did earlier in this video, which is you just have to pay attention to the gaps. And a friend of mine told me that these cars are built from the rear forward. So that template I made, those gaps, with my steel bar, they worked really, really well, just to keep the things in the right orientation to themselves. And then really just focusing on the door gap first, because everything else can really kind of fit in. My protocol was to do to get the gap at the top of the door first, and then work my way to making sure the gap was even on the bottom. You will see that I'm going to need a little bit of lead filler at the bottom, but you need that anyway. That's actually part of how these cars are built. They're not so precise. They don't need a little bit of filler where the quarter panel interface and the chassis come together. So I'm going to take you through right now, just welding wise, setting wise rather. I found myself at least in the middle setting. On mine I have A through E. So C for me is like dead center. And then I've got 1 through 10 on wire feed. I was somewhere between 2 and 3 almost all the time. But I will say that when I did the door jamb, like where you put your seal, you can't get the tip of your welder in far enough. So I actually had to increase the voltage and wire speed so that my tip could be a little further away and I could still make a bead. Does that make sense? So yeah, let me just take you through kind of what it looks like now before I grind everything off, just in case you're looking for like pure weld porn. This ain't it. Okay, starting at the back, I'm going to get to this section in a second, but you'll see that I've got welds all the way down. Come on, baby, give me some focus. There you go. I got welds all the way down each channel. And it's interesting here because this gets triple sandwiched. It goes the chassis, then this middle piece, then the outer skin. So you got to really clamp it hard to get a bead that goes all the way through all those pieces. This section's very tricky. There's a ton of lead in here still, actually. So it was sparking and sparking and sparking as I was trying to weld this part together. It's not amazingly bonded, but it's pretty bonded. And then I'll shave this thing down, and then obviously when I do my drip rail delete, I'll be leading in here a lot more. But for now, this is pretty good. Then I've got a nice seam through here. I feel really good about that. This was another, I wouldn't say tricky section, but after the door jamb was done, I had to really focus on making sure that this curve was right. So you got to really get that correct. You see, got a little divot right there. I can dump a little bit of weld in there when all is said and done, and I'll be able to smooth that out just fine. And then this is the section I was talking about, like where you have to get your welder. You got to crank it up a little bit because you can't really get the tip of the welder in here. You can't get it in as far as you want to. You could conceivably remove the copper on it, but I just didn't do that. I don't know enough about that. And then as I work my way down, by the way, I don't know if anybody mentions this before, having an LED like this right on your work is absolute. I don't want to say it's absolutely necessary because it's not necessary, but holy moly, does it make your life easier? Because you've got these really dark, even if you have a lens in your helmet that auto, darkens, it's really hard to see when you get into these little spots and it gets kind of dark. Anyway, so it's really helpful to have a nice LED light like this. Anyway, so all the way down here, then I put a few up top, a couple here, and then a couple here. I've got the same door gap situation on this side as I do on the other, which is right here at the bottom. It dips a little bit, but this is all lead filler from the factory. This whole section is lead from the factory. So I will do the same thing when the time comes and get it all into here, and we should be golden delicious. And let me just take you through, obviously I plugged a bunch of these little holes that I had around, but let me just take you through this last part where the quarters merge into this section. This section and this section are kind of flapped out a little bit. And what you have to do, at least what I did, having looked at my car, which is right there, this sort of tapers down and then tapers in. So I just used my tin snips and I cut here and I cut here. And then you really, once everything was set and completely in, I just hammered this stuff in and plugged the holes. And I love how sort of it merged into this kind of one piece. So once I grind all this stuff down, it's going to be really smooth. And then this is another spot that gets leaded from the factory. My templates worked great. And I don't know how I did this, but I accidentally welded one of my screws in here. So I have to cut that off somehow. I don't actually have any idea how I'm going to cut it off, but hopefully I'll be able to do that. Otherwise, the only other thing I have to do from a welding standpoint is underneath here, this chassis lip, I don't know if it had been cut or what the story is, but I couldn't really get plug welds to go here. So I have to weld all under here, but I have to hit this with a grinder first. I've got to grind all of this grossness away underneath. And then I will seam weld up along this edge under here and do the same on the other side. But, you know, come on. I am so thrilled. This thing is just dead nuts straight. It's a little bit off, but hey, baby, these are hand-built cars, and I'm a hand-built kind of guy doing it for the first time. As long as my bumpers fit correctly, and they do, I'm thrilled with how it came out. So let me just hit this thing with the grinder for the next couple of hours. Sorry, neighbors. And I will check back in with you guys. Well, after an exhausting hour or two, I am finished with the first major grind. So this is like a really rough grinding wheel on my angle grinder. And I just use it because it makes really short work of just the top part of the welds. You can see this is a very rough cut, but I was able to knock these things down. All of these along the seam. It actually looks smoother in real life than it does on camera, but this is all super smooth now. And I'm particularly pleased with this section, actually. Get you guys in here. This section right here, this thing really all just blends beautifully into the quarter now. It looks like it's one single piece. And this is an area, again, that gets leaded from the factory. So the next thing I'm going to do is break out the little finger sander. I have a 36 grit set of belts. Let's see if I have any right here. I do not. Yeah, I do. There we go. So I have a 36 grit belt. Let's see. Get in there, baby. That goes on this thing. Does a really good job, especially now that I've knocked down the major stuff. But it'll be a lot easier to get into like these crevices with it. And I'll be able to smooth out in here in between the door jamb really well. Once that's all done and I get rid of most of the top stuff, then I go over it, then I go over it with kind of a smoother, higher disc sander where I kind of blend everything together. So I'm gonna go do that. Again, probably not something you need to see, but I'm gonna go hit that right now. And if you guys have any question about any of this stuff, just hit me in the comments. I will answer as much as I possibly can. Again, this is my first time, so you know, question with a grain of salt, if you will. All right, finger sander has done much better. I don't know if you can see this. Really nice and clean around there. Really love how this has cleaned up. Look how good that looks. That interface between the quarter and the rear panel came out really good. And these are virtually invisible up along this edge. So I think what I'm going to do now is, I think I'm going to throw a wire brush. Actually, no, I'm not. I'm going to go through and sand where I can with, oh, I'll turn this way, with a finer paper on a flat sander so that I can get just the surfaces really good and flat. And then I think I'll probably end up going over everything with a wire brush at the end, and we should be good to go. Holy shnikes. So I couldn't be happier with how this turned out. I'm sitting because this was such an incredible amount of work. I did so much grinding, like 4 complete layers of grinding. I love how it turned out. I mean, you can see, I went over it with the finger sander and then with a wire brush, and it's just polished. It looks fantastic. Some of the welds are completely invisible now. And it's going to be, you know, I have to resist my instinct to, you know, put some body filler into it because I really do want to lead the entire thing. So I will lead filler it at some point in the near future as soon as I can get the kit. And it's going to be absolutely perfect. So you know, I'm looking at these gaps on each door, and to me it's like, what is this, the 9th time I've done this? I'm so happy with how the gaps turned out. And trust me when I tell you that if you are considering doing this, oh, by the way, I have to stop everything and say thank you so much to Restoration Design for all the panels. Literally everything you see back there quarter panels, rear inner deck, rear inner latch, rear outer latch, all from Restoration Design. And I got to tell you, if you're doing a project like this with cheap Chinese metal, you are going to pull your hair out. The really cool thing about Restoration Design is their stuff just fits. It just works. So huge thanks to them. The link is in the description if you want to check out the rest of their stuff. And again, couldn't be more pleased. Now what's next? You will see via the last scene of this video what the focus is going to be from this point on. So last week I asked you guys to give me a thumbs up, a like on this video, and comment. I know it's a pain in the ass. It does actually make a difference. The YouTube algorithm picks that stuff up, and I'm trying my hardest to grow this channel and maybe get something looped into the algorithm so it can grow a little quicker than it's growing at the moment. But I'm still here. I'm still cranking these things out. I'm still so excited that you are here. And check out the theme of the next few videos coming up. I'll see you next time.